Girl in Translation was my debut novel about a smart girl living in, the slums of Brooklyn, working in a factory, having a dual life between her privileged private school and her poor factory life. Girl in Translation, my debut novel, was very much autobiographically based, as is, I think, all of my novels to some extent. They all have a real core that comes from my real life. And indeed, in Girl in Translation, the protagonist, a young, smart immigrant girl, lives in pretty much the same apartment that I grew up in, which is, as I said, this incredibly rundown place in Brooklyn that was so freezing cold throughout the New York winters because the heating system didn't work. I mean, the apartment was, of course, not actually legal, but we didn't know this. And the windows were covered with a sheet of ice on the inside all winter long. And then in Girl in Translation, again, Kimberly and her mother work in a Chinatown clothing factory, which I did as well. Actually, the difference is that Kimberly was 11 when she started working in that factory, and I was only 5 in real life. So definitely a lot of parallels with my real life. Sometimes I'm very envious of other writers who kind of grew up knowing their place in the world, and grew up knowing that it was an option to write, who had the ability to be creative from a young age. Some of them, their parents were professors or writers themselves. And this kind of destiny that we writers have, or that we feel like we have, that was something that they embraced from a very young age. And that was something I did not have at all. I didn't even know a person could be a writer. Like, obviously the books came from somewhere, but my brain didn't get that far. It was really a matter of survival. And, that writing experience, like you said, I mean, clearly I was drawn to it. I grew up, I was like, I'm going to get a real job. That was my only goal in life, was to get out of that factory and to get out of the life I was stuck in, and the very male dominated hierarchy that my family established around me, which is something that connects more deeply to my most recent novel, The Leftover Women. And so those were my goals. And when I did wind up going to Harvard, it was there that one night I actually wrote a poem and completely shocked myself and realized, oh my goodness, it is an option to write. So something was drawing me to it, despite my going down the physics track and thinking I was going to have a career as a physicist. And I would say the experience was, maybe not therapeutic, but connected to therapy. Maybe healing is the right word. That it is something that it was very important for me to write about. And sometimes things happen in life where you think there is nothing redeeming about this whatsoever. This is like not an experience where I can actually say, oh, thank God it happened. And yet, when you write about those kinds of experiences, you do make them redeeming, by the very act, it's like meditation, by the very act of paying attention to something that can seem really irredeemable. You are connecting with the world, you're connecting with yourself, you're looking at it from a maybe deeper point of view, and you're sharing that experience in a way where you can look at it and say, all right, this is what it was, and there's a certain kind of terrible beauty in looking at that. Indeed, in The Leftover Women, for my heroine, Jasmine Yang, it is a real overwhelming experience when she comes to the US for the first time. And let me just quickly say what The Leftover Woman is about. The Leftover Woman is the story of 2 mothers, 2 worlds, and one impossible choice. It's about what happens when a young woman in China gives birth and it's told shortly afterwards that her baby had died. She finds out a few years later that her daughter had not died, but had been placed for adoption by her husband to a wealthy American couple, another casualty of China's controversial one-child policy. When the novel opens, Jasmine, the birth mother, has followed her daughter to New York City to try to get her back. And The Leftover Woman is told from two points of view, from that of Jasmine, the birth mothers, and from that of Rebecca, the adoptive mother, who is affluent with a handsome husband, a high powered career, a beautiful home, and an adopted Chinese daughter she absolutely adores. So when the novel opens, indeed, like you said, we see Jasmine coming into Chinatown and being overwhelmed with the differences between her old life and this new lush life in the United States. And, I think the only way to do it is, as a writer, is in your imagination to relive that, to feel what is that like for all of my senses? What was that experience for myself like? What were things that people said to me then that they maybe wouldn't say now? And to put that as best you can on the page.
So as the story goes on, where did you originally get the idea for this particular juxtaposition?
Well,
Oh,
yeah, Jasmine came first for me because, of course, she's so close to my own life. In that, I call this my most deeply personal novel since Gone Translation, and this is because I really grew up in a very old-fashioned family where it was just taken for granted that boys were better than girls, and that was way better to have a boy than a girl. And here I am, a girl, and the seventh. So the hierarchy was determined by age and gender, and I was at the wrong side of both hierarchies. So I was supposed to shut up and listen to everybody else in my family. So as a Chinese daughter, I was a total failure. I was not good at cooking, still horrible. I was a terrible housekeeper. I had very much my own opinions, which I would try to keep to myself. But yet, even looking my brothers or my father in the eye was considered an act of disobedience. Later on, when we had escaped the factory and I was trying to get a job for an internship when I was in high school. I got one at Sloan Kettering in New York in a genetic engineering laboratory, and I had to ask my parents for permission. The first and only thing they asked was, well, who's the head of the lab? Who's your boss? Is it going to be a man or a woman? And I said, well, it's a man. And they said, well, that's completely inappropriate. You can't work for a man. And I wasn't allowed to take the job. So that was the kind of environment that I grew up in. When I was young, it was made clear to me that my only choices were either growing up in that factory and being stuck in the cycle of life of the factory until I was an old woman, or trying to convince some poor dude to marry me. And this was something that they despaired of because I was so bad in terms of every benchmark as a good Chinese daughter. So that was when I decided I would go to Harvard instead. So that core of Jasmine, of feeling unseen, unheard, and unvalued as a woman without any power in a traditional power structure, was the inspiration behind the book. But indeed, the moment I had Rebecca, the moment that I understood, oh, it's not going to be told only by Jasmine, but also by the adoptive mother, and the way the adoptive mother navigates life and all of the issues that come with being the complex modern woman that Rebecca is, that is the moment when I had The Leftover Woman. I knew they would collide. Yes, I actually knew from the very beginning the ways in which they would interact. And I knew that that would be a point of suspense for the reader, to know how and when Jasmine was actually going to meet her daughter and actually be able to interact with her and with Rebecca, and how it was all going to play out. But I did know from the beginning that these two stories were going to fit together like this in the jigsaw puzzle that I had made of the book. I always know the ending before I start my books. Even with Girl in Translation, I had a flash where I saw the beginning and the very end, and then I can write the book. However, I have to say that with The Leftover Woman, I thought I knew the ending, but I didn't really. And the reason is because The Leftover Woman is an impossible dilemma. It's two mothers who both have a right to the child, who both truly love the child, and who are both making very big mistakes. But yet, I did not want to make one clearly the person who should get the child. I wanted the reader to vacillate between Jasmine and Rebecca because that's what I believe is true. You know, I believe that every situation is different and that you cannot say, well, the birth mother always has to write to the child or the adoptive mother always has to write to the child. It depends so much on the details of every single situation. And so it was really hard to get to the right ending because, well, you know, as an author, the ending is kind of our moral stamp of the book, right? It's our saying, well, we think it should work out this way. You know, it has kind of weight, whether or not we want it to or not, that we are saying something about our themes and our message in the way that the book ends. And it was very hard to find an ending that was nuanced enough to try to convey what I really meant to say in the book. So at some point in this book, I think actually everybody was like in jail, in bed with each other, or dead, you know, and it's only at the end that I wound up with the right mix, I hope.